Join me for a conversation with Matt Moniz. He was one of the youngest mountaineers to summit all of the 14ers in Colorado in record time, as well as the highest peak in all 50 states, as well as one of the youngest climbers on many of the biggest mountains in the world, including Everest and Lhotse. You'll hear some of his compelling stories about triumph and tragedy, and how it's contributed to who he is today. Stay with us. Welcome to the Avid Adventurer. I'm your host, Dave Secunda, founder of Avid for Adventure, and I am psyched you're here. Each week, just like today, I'll bring you an interview with a kiddo, young adult, or parent as they share not only the details of their noteworthy outdoor pursuits, but also how they navigate risk, challenge, setbacks, and service in their journey. It'll bring a smile to your face, and you'll feel your heart expand as you get to know the inner landscapes of these athletes. After listening, I know you'll feel uplifted and ready for your own next Avid adventure. So let's dive in. All right. Matt Moniz, I'm so glad to have you with us today. Such a pleasure. I realize as I'm just about to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, I had like butterflies in my stomach because it's been quite a while since I've had an opportunity to talk to you. And I'm just so excited to hear about kind of how your life has unfolded since many, many moons ago when I knew you as a little kid. And so I'm just so happy to have this arc come full circle. So to start with, let me ask you to just introduce yourself, share where you're living and your preferred pronouns, and how old you are today, just to kind of get a little bit of a level setting.
Yeah, of course. Great to be on. Really excited about it. My name is Matt Moniz. Originally from Boulder, Colorado, and currently living up in Winter Park, Colorado. So getting an opportunity to ski a lot, which is wonderful. Preferred pronouns are he, him. And I am now 25 years old.
Amazing. Wonderful. So I want to start by giving you the opportunity to share three things that you're really proud of in your outdoor adventures. And I'd encourage our listeners, dig in deep, look on Google for Matt Moniz and his various escapades and adventures in the outdoors, because there are many. But I'd love to hear from you just those things that you're really proud of that you'd like to share with our listeners.
Yeah, of course. So I think there's probably kind of three very different things that I am really proud of in my experiences in the outdoors. And I think the first one of those is probably the opportunity to climb Makalu. And for a lot of the listeners, you've probably heard of Everest and maybe K2 and some of the other big mountains in the world. But not a lot of people have heard of Makalu. And it's the sixth tallest mountain on the planet, sixth or fourth tallest mountain on the planet. And it is, I had the opportunity to climb it back in, when was that? I guess 2016 now. And it was an incredible climb. It really pushed my limits technically, physically. And I think one of the coolest parts about it was that not many people have heard about it. And it's kind of one of those things where if you're in the climbing community and it's something that is well known, but I think it's really cool that there are still mountains and there's still places out there that are really unique, and that there's a lot of unexplored areas. I think the next aspect is probably an adventure that I did fairly recently. When I went to Fiji on an adventure race. And this is something that I had not done previously. I had no adventure racing background, and I had very little experience or background in any of the disciplines in the adventure race. And I had not spent really any time in the jungle. And I was asked to be part of a team that was made up of Boy Scouts. And we basically sailed, climbed, hiked, ran, and mountain biked all across the islands of Fiji. We didn't place very well, but I think the coolest experience for me was really doing something that I had not done previously and really pushed me out of my comfort zone. I think the last one is probably when in 2018, I went back to Nepal and was able to climb Everest. And I think the piece that I think was really unique, and what I'm most proud of is not actually summiting Everest on that expedition. We actually did a big component of that was doing a bunch of scientific research. So we worked with Cornell School of Medicine to essentially recreate the NASA twin study on Everest. So basically looking at genomic changes between twins living at sea level versus twins that are at 28,000 feet. And I have a twin sister. She is really big into the outdoors. And then my climbing partner, Willie Benegas, has an identical twin brother as well. So it was a really unique opportunity to blend kind of two big passions of mine, one being science and two being climbing, into a really interesting project.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for sharing the diversity of those. One thing that I love just about your answer there, just even on the first one, talking about Makalu was just like, was it the fourth highest or the sixth highest? And what year was that? And I've always found you one that has these huge accomplishments in the outdoors and yet a really low ego about them. And one of the last times that we talked was an invitation when you came to speak to staff at Avid for Adventure when you had completed the highest peak in all 50 states, as well as I think it was the fastest time on Colorado 14ers. And I remember you sharing about it with such like just enthusiasm, like kid-filled enthusiasm. Like it was really fun. It was awesome. So many folks that I talk to about outdoor escapades, it is really ego-driven. And I've just heard you speak so often about your connection with some of the things around the edges that aren't necessarily the things that people identify as that big goal out in front. So we'll loop back by and talk more about that big goal versus the big goal, big G goal versus the little G goal. But let me ask you to just kind of go a level deeper. And as far as an introduction, answer the question, if you really knew me, you'd know that. And it's an invitation to share something about yourself. So just to complete that sentence, if you really knew me, you would know that. Take it from there.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I really like it, and I think that one of the biggest things that the people around me and closest to me understand and know about me is that I love introducing people to the outdoors. I think that is one of the most special things that you can do, especially being in a really amazing opportunity privilege to be able to go on these expeditions, to have this experience, and to not share that with people is almost feels like a crime to me. I think that the outdoors to me is one of our planets, if not our planet's most valuable resource. And I think that if we don't inspire and get people in the outdoors, that resources will not be enjoyed by future generations, which is really scary to me. So I think that like anything that I can do, whether it's like teaching my coworker to ski on the bunny slopes at Winter Park, or teaching someone how to roll their kayak for the first time, like those are things that for me are really, really special. And I think that things that I feel just as excited and accomplished about is climbing mountains or going on expeditions.
Hmm. Well, share that experience for yourself. Who or what sort of folks introduced you to the outdoors? And are there any specific experiences that come forward to you as really memorable, kind of being on the receiving end of that introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't be in the place that I am today if I didn't have these mentors that have kind of fostered this love and appreciation for the outdoors and outdoor adventures. I think the couple that come to mind, one is my dad. When my sister and I were really young, he was really passionate about throwing us into the outdoors and teaching us to climb and camp and ski at a really young age. And I thought that was a normal experience growing up. And I think that it took a lot of reflection looking back on it, that is a really unique opportunity. And I think that's I think where a lot of my kind of love for the outdoors really stemmed from. I think that kind of more specifically, Willie Benegas, who's a very close friend of mine and a big mentor, and who I have done a lot of climbing with in the past. He really kind of took me under his wing and started to introduce me to more technical climbing, technical skiing, and really kind of pushing my limits and comfort into the outdoors. And I think that a lot of my risk tolerance, a lot of my respect for the mountains comes from Willie. And I think the last piece is maybe something that's a little bit more relatable to different people. Is a good friend of mine, Jordan Sanford, I went to school up at Dartmouth in the Northeast, and I'd always wanted to get into whitewater kayaking. And my dad was into whitewater kayaking a bit, and he's like, I don't want to. So I had to go out and find someone, and it's a very humbling experience being a beginner in something, in any activity. And I definitely felt that. And I think having a mentor in the space that is willing to help push your limits, but also willing to understand your concerns and everything else is really important. And I think that those experiences and those mentors can really kind of make or break your experience in the outdoors.
Share from that a little bit more specifically, that opportunity to be a novice, to kind of come into something new like kayaking. Do you remember a particular moment where there was fear or trepidation or elation at like mastering or figuring out something new?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the one of my first days kayaking was on the Connecticut River on a small rapid right outside Dartmouth. I think it was class 2, maybe. And I remember going to my first hole, like all excited. It was the first wave train, and there was a little hole at the end. And I was like, I totally got this. And I went in and immediately rolled and swam. And I felt like such a novice, and I was so embarrassed. And my buddy paddles up to me and he's like, "Don't worry about it. Like that happens to everyone." And I think that the more and more I started kayaking, the more and more I realized that is that everyone swims no matter how good you are. And I think taking that kind of humble attitude into it is really important. I think not only for kayaking, for any outdoor activity. And like even the best climber, even the best kayaker in the world, like everyone swims. Everyone has their bad days, and I think that that's kind of a unique opportunity to be a novice, to experience that, and to also like grow from that. I think one of the most excited I've ever been in the outdoors was when I nailed my first combat roll, and I was like, "This is awesome." And that's an experience that like a lot of people have in kayaking, and it's something that kind of is a foundational skill. But to do that is really, I think that like for me, there's a lot of different areas in my life where I've done this activity at a very high level. But I think even like being at a very low level and experiencing like a big win was just as rewarding.
Absolutely. I love that. Like I'll take that away. Everyone swims. It's a great metaphor. Yeah. For everything outdoors, but for life in general, it's like we all swim. Some days we just swim, and whether we like it or not. And from the way you're telling that as well, it felt like, and I want to go a little bit deeper on this opportunity. Who is your friend who was introducing you to kayaking?
Jordan Sanford.
Jordan. So it seems like this moment that you came up for air, and he paddles up to you was a little bit of a pivotal moment where he could have just said, everyone swims, as he did, and gone one direction, or like, man, that was really an F up, or whatever it was. And it feels like, from what you told me about the joy that it brings you to introduce people to the outdoors, is that you spend time with people in the everyone swims moment, and it's okay, and again, when you were sharing that and you had the smile on your face, it just looked like this reflection back on that moment, that was a moment in your relationship with him that made it deeper, like a deeper connection between you.
Yeah.
And have you had that opportunity with partners in the outdoors in other settings? Like, are there particular moments, either big accomplishments or big failures, where you really felt that bond of companionship tightening up with who you're with?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I think the biggest times I've experienced that are times of adversity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that being in the outdoors when something goes wrong with someone is never a good situation. But you really understand, you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn about a lot about that other person. And I think that some of my closest friends and closest mentors have kind of, unfortunately or fortunately, arrived from situations of adversity.
Can you
Um,
share one of those? Does one come forward when it was like one of those moments and what happened?
yeah, I think probably the biggest one is in 2015, during when we were on Mount Everest. So we were attempting to climb Everest and Lhotse, and then try to do a ski descent of the Lhotse Couloir. And we had just arrived into base camp on April 23rd,
Mm-hmm.
2015, and the earthquake in Nepal happened. And I think some more recently, I think there was a Netflix documentary, so I think more and more people know about the events that took place in base camp, which was really unfortunate. Essentially, the earthquake triggered a massive avalanche that wiped through base camp and killed about 22 or 23 people, and injured around 80 people. And that was a really, really scary moment. And I think one for me, a really humbling moment in the mountains. And I think that the the time in which I spent with Willie, my climbing partner, who I was with at the time, both immediately after the avalanche and earthquake, as well as the months and years preceding that, I think the conversations we've had, the relationship that we have is much deeper because of that shared experience. And again, I think that you get to know yourself in those situations, and you get to know the people that you're surrounded with in those situations. And I think never something that is good to happen, but I think that there's, under the right circumstances, you can learn a lot about yourself, and learn a lot about the people you're around.
What in that particular experience, and I remember like personally, I was following that expedition. I knew within minutes of that earthquake and avalanche occurring, it was scary here at home. And I'm going to ask you about that as far as those, family members who weren't there. I remember hearing that you kind of took shelter behind a boulder and found yourself safe through that. What was the specific learning that you had about yourself and about Willie in that situation? Like, what are those things, um, to kind of go, like, what are those things that changed that day for you that you found out about yourself or others?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I found out about myself is, like, it is so important to take a humble attitude into the outdoors and into the
Mm-hmm.
mountains. I think that before then, I had been very lucky. I had had wonderful weather windows, not any major accidents or injuries that have happened in the outdoors, despite spending a lot of time in the mountains and in some pretty dangerous places. And I think that I had almost a bit of um, perception that, like, nothing bad can happen to me in the outdoors. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that was a massive wake up call for me, being
Mm-hmm.
so close to people have died, and being in a really terrible situation. And I think that it actually ended up fostering, I think, a much healthier relationship with the outdoors, and an understanding for me personally, that every time you go into the outdoors, there is risk. And I know that we'll probably touch on risk later, but the calculus for risk, I think, changed a lot that day.
Mm-hmm.
And to know that, like, doesn't matter who you are in the outdoors, like, bad things can happen. And I think the most important thing is learning from those experiences, and trying not to, and ensuring that you have a proper understanding of how you approach that into the outdoors. I think one of the other interesting things that I learned about Willie that day is that the people that you want to be surrounded with in the outdoors and on these big expeditions are people who can maintain a calm, cool head in really stressful situations. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
huddling behind this rock, and the avalanche went over us, and Willie looked over me and he's like, "It's going to be okay. Like, this is bad, but it's going to be okay." And I think that that moment for me was like a pretty pivotal moment for me, being like panicked and freaking
Mm-hmm.
out versus like, it's going to be okay.
Wow. I mean, Matt, it actually brings tears to my eyes, like to think about you that in that situation, because I over here, as I'm sure your father and your mother and your sister, like I was in tears, like as this was unfolding with this like lack of knowing and seeing this disaster unfolding at a distance. Um, and so there was this whole different experience for your family. I know, and those that loved you, and there are many of those. Kind of talk about that broader experience of like, what about the circle of people around you when you're in situations that are closer to the edge and get very close to the edge as this one did in this very unexpected earthquake and avalanche. How, I don't know if there's a specific question other than like, when did you talk to your family? What was that connection like? And uh, was there any change in the family dynamic around risk tolerance and your relationship with them?
Yeah, so I think that it's a really interesting question, and I think kind of specific. I'll start kind of specifically at that moment, and then kind of broaden it out to how, at least I think that I approach risk, and a lot of the people in my family approach risk, especially
Mm-hmm.
now. So the earthquake happened, avalanche went over us. We were both okay. We got up and ran over to the what was left of our camp, and I remember grabbing my phone. And surprisingly, there's
Mm.
actually service in base camp, which is pretty interesting, and there's Wi-Fi. So I remember grabbing my phone and then looking at my phone and knowing that I had to text my dad and my
Yeah.
parents. And I was like, what do I say? And I'm like, I don't want to scare them. I don't know if like I didn't know that it had been an earthquake. I actually thought that it was just a movement of the glacier and then which caused this avalanche. So I didn't realize that it probably would hit national news the next morning. And I didn't want to scare them. At that point, I didn't know the extent of damage that had occurred in base camp. So I just texted them, "Are you awake?" And I left it at that. I'm like, I don't want to freak them out, but I want to like,
It's like a booty call to your parents or something. It's just like,
yeah.
yep.
I'm like, are you awake? Do I like?
Yeah.
Can I give you a quick
Yeah.
call? And
Mm-hmm.
they of course were sleeping because Nepal's I think a 12-hour
Yeah.
difference. So it was probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and as soon as that happened, or right after that happened, Willie and I kind of started to understand the entire situation on the ground was much worse than we initially thought. So we basically kind of pivoted to much more of a search and rescue role. At the time, I had the only first aid skills I had were first aid merit badge in Boy Scouts, I think, and I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that I have ever made in the outdoors, was not ensuring that I had the proper medical skills to respond to an accident situation like that. And immediately after that trip, I took my EMT course and worked as a ski patroller, and I think that was a big shift in my own
Mm.
calculus. But um, we basically spent about 2 to 3 days doing search and rescue. Willie had a lot more medical experience than I did, so we would look for patients, bring them to the areas where they were being treated. There are some really unsung heroes of that day. The physicians over at the Everest ER clinic
Mm.
did some really amazing work with some very limited resources and had to make some very tough calls. So a lot of what we were doing during that time was very occupied with this really important task of trying to find people. Um, as the hours were rolling by, of course, my parents like started hearing what was coming out of base camp, what was coming out of Nepal, and they like were trying to get a hold of me. And of course, my phone had long since died and everything else, and I
Mm.
didn't really put it into perspective how
Mm.
they must have perceived everything, because they got this text like minutes after the earthquake happened. They didn't know if it had like was a delayed send or if I was okay. And then there's all these reports of lots of people had died in base camp, and they know we were showing up to base camp during that time. So I think that was a very stressful time at home that I didn't like learn to appreciate until I actually got home and was able to talk to them. What was interesting is I'm not a superstitious type of person. At least I don't think I am. But my sister, my twin sister, woke up and she actually walked to my parents' room that night while like what during the earthquake, or right after the earthquake happened, and she's like, "Hey, has Matt texted you or anything? Like, is everything okay over there?" So we joke that it's like a twin telepathy thing, but kind of an interesting side note there.
For sure. Yeah. I don't think it's superstition. It's just like you guys have deep love and connection, and wherever you are, it's strong. Wow. What was the first conversation with your parents?
It's a good question. I think a lot of those probably 4 to 5 days were very busy, and I don't remember a lot from them, if I'm being honest. I know that I talked to my parents very briefly, basically saying, "I'm okay, Willie's okay." Damien at the time was also on the mountain. Damien's okay. What's happening in base camp is not okay. But like, we're okay, we're safe. But that's all I can say right now. And I remember being very short conversations. It wasn't until I think we're back in Kathmandu, where we actually kind of sat down and was like, this was actually a really bad situation.
Okay.
Willie and I, and Damien as well, ended up staying in Nepal I think Willie and I stayed for probably another month. And I think Damien stayed for 4 or 5 more months, working with the UN World Food Program to do some village assessments in the Manaslu region. So the UN World Food Program didn't have a lot of acclimated staff to get up to some of these villages to do some of the assessments. So we were up there with a team of doctors, basically just understanding what villages needed what supplies, how much food they had, how many injured people they had, so the World Food Program could send kind of a more targeted response. And I think that experience actually was really beneficial for me, for my mental health, for kind of coping and processing like a lot of what happened. So I think that while it was not easy work, I think it was, for me, and I think for Willie as well, talking to him a lot, it was very important that we kind of stayed behind and kind of saw at least some of the things through. And it didn't feel like we had this experience, we had this accident, and we immediately went home. And like everyone around us was acting normal, and like this really bad thing had happened. So I think for us, it was a good way for us to process what had happened in like a much healthier way.
Thank you for that. Wow. Well, I know a lot of our listeners are parents or will be parents, and at some point, maybe you'll have kids or kiddos or whatever it may be. How does this whole experience of growing up in the outdoors inform how you might be as a parent in the future? Like, what does it make you think about if you had kids, and what would you want, and how would you introduce them to the outdoors and that sort of thing? Or would you? Like, how does it all unfold when you think about paying it forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that like it also gives me a perspective of how my parents probably feel, like letting me go on these massive expeditions to places that are not necessarily safe. But at the same time, like, my greatest experiences in life have happened in the outdoors. And like, that is something that I never want to shelter anyone from. I think whether it's my kids or my cousins or my nephews or nieces, like, that is something that I'll always prioritize, like introducing people to this amazing thing that is the outdoors, whether it's the oceans or the mountains or the forests or the rivers. Like, it's all amazing, and it's all a really incredible opportunity to learn a lot about yourself and have some really incredible experiences. So I think that, like, I'll absolutely encourage anyone to go into the outdoors. I think it's super special, and it's an amazing place. Um, and I think that more recently, especially as I've taken some of my friends and and started to mentor them a little bit more in the outdoors, it's made me think a lot more critically about like how comfortable I am making risk assessment calls on their behalf. And I think that one of the biggest things that I've taken away from it is like, everything is risky in life, right? Driving down I-70 during a snowstorm is incredibly risky. And I think there is a lot of um, a lot of people who may choose to, I think that whatever your risk tolerance is, there's no correct or wrong answer. I think that like I won't go backcountry skiing on like considerable or high avalanche danger days. But that's a calculus that people have to make on their own. And I think that one of the big things that I try to teach people when I'm taking into the outdoors is having them understand this is a full category of risk, but also you need to make this decision on your own. Like this isn't something that should be influenced by me or yourself. Um, and and it's like risk tolerance in the outdoors is I think it's fascinating. And there's a lot of calculus that goes into it. I think there's a lot of things that you can control. But I think there's a lot of objective dangers that you can't control. And it's how willing you are to accept the parts of that you can't control, and how willing you are to still immerse yourself in those types of environments.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot packed in those statements there. I want to kind of unpack a couple of them there. I hear a lot about the importance of developing judgment to kind of understand the risk and to go in, eyes wide open with that assessment as well. But one of the things you said in taking friends into the outdoors is this greater awareness of, what risk tolerance you are willing to take on for them or with them, that type of thing. And I will say, like, as a parent, that is the parent journey. Like you have this little ball of human that can't do anything, and then slowly they develop more and more independence to this point where you've stepped further and further away as a parent. But there are these many years of this incremental, slow pulling back and repetitive assessment of what's too far, what's too great of a risk for them to take, and what's too much of a helicopter, like what's too constraining, so that my little kiddo is not having the full experience of life there overall. And so it is interesting being in that parent role to negotiate that, because there is this portion of time that you witnessed growing up where there is a parental responsibility and oversight for those choices of kind of what sort of situations to bring your kids into overall. So I guess what I'd say is, what advice would you have based on your life experience? Like, what advice would you have for other parents on how to navigate that line of, being overly protective versus so hands off that that the risk is not worth the reward, the potential, risk in these situations?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, and I think that makes me think back to my dad not wanting to teach me how to whitewater kayak. And I think at the time I was like, this is ridiculous. Like you did this in college. Like this is a sport that you really enjoyed doing. Like why can't you teach me how to do it? And he's like, it's too dangerous. Like I'm not going to teach you how to do it. And I think that at the time I was like any other high school student or high school aged kid. And I was like, this is so dumb. And I think that like spending a lot more time both kayaking, but also in different environments in the outdoors, I understand him a lot. I understand that decision a lot more. And I think that I'm sure that there's going to be a point in which I tell my eventual kids that like that's too much. Like that I'm drawing the line in the sand for you on like what that risk tolerance should be. And I think that I think that growing up and getting to experience a lot of these different environments and being put into positions that aren't safe in the outdoors. I think that judgment call needs to be explored. And I think that it's a fine line to balance. Because I think that there are definitely times in which my parents have said you were not doing something, and at the time I thought it was ridiculous. And looking back on it, it was a very good judgment call and one that I could make on my own. But I think that on the flip side, there was definitely experiences that I've had that have been closer calls that I have had to revise and rethink my risk tolerance in the outdoors. And the only way I could do that was to experience that on my own. I think that
Mhm.
I think with kayaking is actually probably a good example. I still love kayaking, and it's a blast. But I think I jumped into it too fast. And I remember being down on a kayaking trip down in Ecuador, paddling some pretty hard class 5 rivers and having a really bad swim. And
Mm.
I think that that was one of the moments where I was like, I got to tone it back. I have to pull back from this. But that's not something that my dad could have said, you can't go on that trip. Like that's
Mm.
something that I had to experience, internalize, and then revise my risk tolerance myself, especially growing up, because like I think that the older that you get, the more I don't want to say wiser, but the more experience you have in the outdoors to be able to refine that risk tolerance. And as someone who was very young, growing up in the outdoors and getting to experience some of these really interesting and unique environments, like that risk tolerance can't, like looking back on it, like I can't make all those decisions because I didn't have enough experience in the outdoors to be able to make those decisions. And I think that that's also something that I
Mhm.
kind of that I kind of grapple with, taking friends out into the outdoors and like introducing new people to different sports and trying to be a mentor, is teaching them, like imparting my experience, but also letting them make their own judgment calls to an extent. Right? There's things that are
Mm.
objectively not smart decisions to make in the outdoors, and I think those need to be flagged. But at the same time, those some of those experiences have to be learned on your own. And I think if you tell someone that like something's too safe or something's too dangerous, like that is a call that oftentimes needs to be learned on their own. So it's
Mm.
not that was a very
Yeah.
long-winded answer to your question, but I think that the reason that is it's really complicated, and I think there is a fine line to walk, and I think
Mhm.
that everyone will make mistakes. There'll be times in which you say like make your own decision, and someone you are mentoring, whether it's your child or your friend, like gets hurt, and that's that you feel that like that's on you. There's other times in which like you make
Mm.
a judgment call saying like nope, you can't do that, and they miss out on a really life-changing experience. And I think that like that just happens. That's just part of life. And but I think
Mm.
it's important to kind of walk that line.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a part of life. It is a difficult one as a parent. And it's interesting. I'll share just a personal recent experience that it doesn't just end either. My mom now is 93, and she has Alzheimer's. And so I try and get out to see her often in this window where she still knows who I am. And just recently she took a bad fall, and she had she had stitches and black and blue, and she got injured. She's going to be fine. She's going to heal. But I had this moment when I saw her, and it was the same moment that I had like with my kids were little, of like, I wish I could have protected you from that. It's just like, it's just this heartbreak of like, oh, should I have fill in the blank, padded the bathroom more, or had an automatic light, or all of the things that, I replay in my mind of like would have, could have. But at the end of the day, as a parent or as a kid, it's just like, we have deep caring and love for these people around us. And as you said, it's a difficult line to navigate. Often we get it right. Sometimes we get it wrong. And that's just the unfolding of life. Well, we talked a lot about risk, and we talked about some of these big experiences that have been kind of scary in the outdoors. Let's kind of bring it full circle here. Describe for me the most recent experience of total joy and upliftment in the outdoors. Like, just thinking back, what recent experience, and if you can, like, tell me specifically a moment when you're just like awesome, just overflowing within you.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that one thing that I recently have been getting into, and with my family, which I think is great, is sailing. And during COVID, my
Mm.
dad had grown up sailing, but kind of we live in Colorado. There's not a
Mm.
lot of great sailing. Um, So kind of fell off with it. And during COVID, we all decided like, there's nothing else to do. Let's go learn how to sail and let's go get our captain's license and kind of like learn how to sail and how to navigate waters. And I think that one of those, um, we went down to the Sea Cortez down in Mexico and all took our sailing courses. And I think that the after that course, we went back to Sea Cortez with my whole family and took out I think a 45-foot catamaran. And we were so nervous. Like we were like, we just took a 1 week course and now we're supposed to like take this boat out in like kind of heavy weather. And the process of like getting relying on everyone's knowledge that they heard during the course and then trying to like jerry rig it together and then getting out there, turning off the engines and sailing was like all of us were so excited. We were so excited that we weren't upside down. We were so excited that like it was a really cool experience because we all were novices together, all trying to figure it out, and it all worked out. And I think that like I love sailing and I've gone out a lot more since then and really want to start incorporating sailing into some of these different future expeditions. But I think that the process of like figuring it out and then it all working out on that boat was so amazing. I remember looking around and every single person on the boat was like grinning ear to ear. It was a very unique experience growing up in Colorado and not really being near the ocean at all. It was we had a blast.
I can see, even as you tell the story, I can see your expression of like smiling ear to ear when you are feeling that upliftment in the outdoors, which could be sailing, could be on a mountain, could be with your family when everyone is, just experiencing the success of that. Where do you feel it in your body? Like if you had to describe it as a physical sensation of like upliftment, enjoying the outdoors, what does it feel like for you?
I think it starts in your stomach and then kind of just works its way up. I think that if you've ever gone out on a powder day and like gotten to the top of a run and it's completely on track, like everyone knows that feeling. Or like made it to
not everyone, but many people.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And kind of it's that same feeling. And I think it's why a lot of us kind of keep coming back to the outdoors is like I think that at least talking to people, like that feeling is kind of a shared experience no matter what you're doing in the outdoors. And I think it's something that is really unique about the outdoors that I think makes it so special and makes people who experience the outdoors keep coming back and keep kind of falling in love with it and keep wanting to do different adventures, whether it's going halfway around the world or like learning to sail in your backyard.
I love it. So tell our listeners what's next for you. What are you doing for work and what are you doing for play and for adventure now and going forward, either in the outdoors or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the next big thing is more recently. I've been at the same job for about 2 years now, kind of entering the phase of my life where I'm kind of recreating the outdoors at a more I guess amateur level, or more just doing it because I kind of love doing it and kind of sneaking out on trips between work vacation and navigating the whole intricacies of PTO, which I think has been a new phase of my life, but one that I've really enjoyed. For work, I'm working at a company called Ginkgo Bioworks, which is a synthetic biology company, a biotech company. We do a lot of work in tracking and tracing different emerging infectious diseases, which has been really unique. So I've gotten to go this year. I've gotten to travel to places that I would have never gone to, not for climbing or outdoors or tourism. I spent a little bit of time in Ukraine this year, working with the Ukrainian Ministry of Health, doing SARS-CoV-2 testing in wastewater. Spent some time in Africa, getting to do different infectious disease monitoring. So I think it's a whole new type of adventure. And in a lot of these environments, you are in the outdoors, and some you're in very urban environments. But at the same time, it's one that I've really enjoyed, and I've so far really. I think that for me, the biggest thing for work that I was trying to get out of it was finding a place to work where I was incredibly excited to wake up in the morning and like do my job, which I think is something that I really want to kind of encourage anyone to do. And I think there's a lot of jobs like that, but I think that it's something that is really special, and that I value a lot. And the other thing is I've been working my pilot's license a lot. So I've had my pilot's license for about 2 years now, and recently I joined the Vermont Air National Guard. I still have to go through a lot of training, but hopefully in a couple years I'll be an F-35 pilot, which will be a whole new adventure, which I'm really excited about. So those are kind of the two work-related things. And then besides that, I have been really interested and motivated to start blending some of these different skill sets that I've kind of acquired over the last 25 years, into more multi-sport adventures, if that makes sense. So I think in April, I'm going to try to get out to Norway to do a ski sailing trip. So charter a boat with a couple friends and basically sail around the fjords skiing up there. So I think that really blends a lot of this newfound passion of sailing in the ocean with a lot of my background growing up skiing. I think that one thing I really am trying to kind of look at is using planes to access different terrain, whether it's climbing or skiing terrain in really remote environments, which has been a lot of fun. I've been doing a lot of practice here in Colorado and Utah, landing on different areas and jumping out of the plane and going for a quick rock climb and then jumping back in the plane and flying somewhere else. So that's been a really unique experience. And I really enjoy learning. And I think that there's a lot of people that kind of get sucked into like, I have to be an expert in like this specific field. And I admire that a lot. Whether your goal is to become the best ski mountaineer on the planet or the best rock climber. But for me, a lot of what I'm trying to do is get as many different experiences as possible and then figure out how to blend all those things together.
I love it. I love it. Well, Matt, I wish you all of the best on your adventures and your path going forward in your career and your flying and your outdoor endeavors. And it's just been such a pleasure having an opportunity to talk with you in this context after many moons of following your adventures from afar and knowing you as a little kid and everything in between. So thank you so much for sharing your journeys with me and the rest of our listeners here. And I'm really, really grateful for the time you spent with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and great to see you again after all these years. But yeah, I love talking, and I think it's really important to share a lot of different experiences from different people and different ways to view the outdoors. And I think that probably everyone listening is the one thing that really people share in common with this is they love the outdoors. And I think that is something that is super special. And again, that's something that I think is the planet's most valuable resource. And I think that something needs to be protected and cared about, and as many people that can get into the outdoors as possible. I think that's a pretty amazing thing.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from this avid adventurer as much as I did. Join me every week as we continue to explore the inner landscapes and outer accomplishments of our guests. And if you know someone who you think would make a great interview, please reach out to me at the email in the show notes. I look forward to reconnecting next week.